Assalamu alaikum, is Sista Samilah. Isn't it funny how suddenly police brutality is a problem in white America now that ICE is knocking on their doors and putting hands on their people? Let me tell you something that's going to make a lot of folks uncomfortable, but the truth has never been about comfort. For decades, centuries even, Black Americans have been screaming from the rooftops about law enforcement violating our rights, brutalizing our bodies, and acting as judge, jury, and executioner in the streets. We showed you the videos. We gave you the testimonies. We buried our children. We protested. We marched. We begged America to see us as human beings deserving of constitutional protections. And what did white America do? They celebrated it, they cheered it on, they told us to just comply with the law, as if compliance has ever protected Black skin from state violence. But now things are different. Now that Immigration and Customs Enforcement is conducting raids in their neighborhoods, now that ICE agents are being aggressive with people who look like them, now that their family members, their neighbors, their coworkers are being grabbed up and roughed up, suddenly police overreach is a crisis. Suddenly due process matters. Suddenly, constitutional rights are important. Suddenly, the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures are worth defending. Where was all this energy when we were telling you the exact same thing? For years, we watched Black men choked to death on camera while white America debated whether he should have sold loose cigarettes. We watched Black women shot in their beds during no-knock raids while white America questioned why she was dating a drug dealer. We watched Black children gunned down in playgrounds while white America analyzed whether the toy gun looked real enough. We watched Black fathers shot in the back while running away. Black mothers slammed to the ground during traffic stops. Black teenagers brutalized for minor infractions, or sometimes for no infraction at all, just for existing in their Blackness. And every single time, without fail, white America had the same response. Just comply. If you weren't doing anything wrong, you wouldn't have anything to worry about. If you just followed orders, you'd be fine. Blue lives matter. Back the blue. They're just doing their jobs. The police feared for their lives. He had a record. She was no angel. They should have just listened to the officer's commands. Do you remember when we told you about stop and frisk in New York City? When we explained how Black and brown people were being stopped, searched, and humiliated without probable cause, without reasonable suspicion, just for walking while Black, white America said it was necessary for public safety. Do you remember when we talked about broken windows policing, how over-policing our communities for minor infractions created a pipeline from the corner store to the prison cell? White America said we should stop breaking the law. Do you remember when we showed you the footage of Rodney King being beaten by multiple officers, 56 baton strikes and kicks while he was on the ground? White America acquitted those officers. We told you about Eric Garner, choked to death for selling cigarettes, gasping, "I can't breathe," 11 times. You made memes mocking his death. We told you about Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old child shot within 2 seconds of police arrival for playing with a toy gun in a park. You investigated his parents' background. We told you about Philando Castile, shot 7 times during a traffic stop while complying with every instruction, murdered for legally carrying a firearm while Black. You blamed him for making the officer nervous. We told you about Breonna Taylor, an EMT shot 8 times in her own home during a botched raid. You focused on her boyfriend defending his home from unannounced intruders. We told you about Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Alton Sterling, Michael Brown, Ahmaud Arbery. We told you about thousands more whose names never made national news, but whose families still grieve, whose communities still remember, whose deaths still haunt us. And white America's response was always the same. Justify, rationalize, minimize, blame the victim, defend the system, back the badge. You created entire narratives to excuse state violence against Black bodies. You said if we just pulled our pants up, spoke proper English, got an education, worked hard, followed the rules, then we'd be safe. But then you watched cops brutalize Black doctors, Black lawyers, Black professors, Black veterans, Black children, and you still found reasons to justify it because it was never really about our behavior. It was about your comfort with seeing us as less than human, as deserving of whatever violence the state inflicted upon us. Now ICE is conducting workplace raids, immigration enforcement actions that sweep up not just undocumented immigrants, but also citizens and legal residents who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, federal agents are being physically aggressive during these operations, manhandling people, denying them access to lawyers, violating their constitutional rights, and suddenly, white America has discovered civil liberties. Suddenly, white folks are talking about due process, about the presumption of innocence, about the danger of giving law enforcement unchecked power, about the Fourth Amendment, about human dignity. Let me ask you something. Where was this concern when it was us? Where were these passionate defenses of constitutional rights when Black Americans were being violated daily? Where was this outrage about law enforcement overreach when it was our communities being occupied like war zones? Where were these think pieces about the dangers of state violence when our children were being killed? The answer is simple, and it's the same answer it's always been: racism. Racism was your guide. Racism allowed you to see police brutality against Black people as justified, necessary, even entertaining, while seeing the same tactics used against white people as tyranny. Racism let you believe that Black people must have done something to deserve it, while white people are innocent victims of government overreach. Racism made you comfortable with a two-tiered system of justice where the Constitution applies differently depending on the color of your skin. If only you had listened when we spoke. If only you had believed us when we told you that giving law enforcement unchecked power to brutalize one group would eventually lead to brutalization of others. If only you had understood that rights are either universal or they're privileges, and privileges can be revoked. If only you had recognized that today's policies against them become tomorrow's policies against you. If only you had seen us as human beings whose warnings were worth heeding. But you didn't listen. You couldn't listen. Because listening would have required acknowledging that the system you benefit from, the system that protects you, is the same system that destroys us. Listening would have required admitting that police brutality was never about individual bad apples, but about a rotten tree with poisoned roots. Listening would have required recognizing that Black Americans have been the canaries in the coal mine, warning about toxic conditions that would eventually affect everyone. You know what's really tragic? We tried to build a coalition. During the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, we weren't just fighting for Black people. We were fighting for all people who suffered under police violence. We highlighted cases involving white victims, Native American victims, Latino victims. We talked about police reform as a universal need. We invited white America to join us in demanding accountability, transparency, and justice. And white America responded by calling us terrorists, by driving cars through our protests, by defending every police killing with increasingly absurd justifications. You had the chance to stand with us when the cost was just acknowledging that Black Lives Matter, that our experiences were real, that the system needed changing. You refused. Now you're experiencing a fraction of what we've been telling you about for generations, and suddenly you want solidarity. Suddenly you want us to care about your rights being violated. Suddenly you need us to join your resistance against government overreach. Here's what makes this situation even more painful. Many of the same people now crying about ICE tactics voted for politicians who explicitly promised aggressive immigration enforcement. They cheered when family separations were announced. They celebrated when workplace raids were expanded. They applauded when enforcement priorities were eliminated. They wanted this as long as they thought it would only affect brown immigrants. They wanted law enforcement to have this power as long as they believed it would never touch them. They didn't realize that authoritarian tactics don't stay contained. They didn't understand that once you normalize state violence against one group, you've normalized it for everyone. They thought their whiteness would protect them indefinitely. They're learning painfully and slowly what Black America has always known. In a police state, nobody is truly safe. Power unchecked corrupts absolutely, and law enforcement with unlimited authority will eventually abuse everyone. Now, let me be clear about something. I'm not saying that what's happening with ICE isn't a problem. It absolutely is a problem. Immigration enforcement that violates constitutional rights, that separates families, that creates terror in communities, that operates outside the bounds of law is a serious issue that demands attention and resistance. But let's not pretend this is new. Let's not act like this aggressive, rights-violating law enforcement approach suddenly appeared out of nowhere. This is the same playbook that's been used against Black communities forever. The only difference is who's experiencing it now. What white America is learning through ICE actions is a lesson Black America could have taught them decades ago if they'd been willing to learn. When you give law enforcement the power to brutalize without consequence, when you strip away oversight and accountability, when you prioritize enforcement over rights, when you dehumanize the targets of state violence, you create a monster that will eventually turn on everyone. The tactics perfected in Black neighborhoods, the equipment tested on Black protesters, the legal theories developed to justify Black deaths, all of that eventually gets deployed more broadly. Stop and frisk in Harlem becomes ICE checkpoints in white suburbs. No-knock raids in Black homes become workplace raids in white businesses. The militarized police tactics used during Black protests become the enforcement strategies used in immigration sweeps. The qualified immunity that protected cops who killed Black people protects ICE agents who violate everyone's rights. The system is working exactly as designed. The only thing that's changed is who's being targeted. So what do we do now? How does Black America respond to white America's sudden awakening to police brutality and state violence? Do we say we told you so and leave them to figure it out on their own? Do we join their resistance despite their refusal to join ours? Do we build a coalition knowing that once the immediate threat to white comfort passes, they'll likely abandon the cause again? These are difficult questions without easy answers. What I can tell you is this. As Muslims, we're commanded to stand for justice, even when it's difficult, even when it's for people who didn't stand for us. Allah tells us in the Quran to be upholders of justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it's against ourselves. Our fight against oppression cannot be selective. We cannot become what we despise. We cannot celebrate when others experience the brutality we've long endured. But we also don't have to pretend this is acceptable or pretend that white America's current concern is genuine or consistent. We can fight against ICE brutality while calling out the hypocrisy. We can defend everyone's constitutional rights while pointing out who was denied those same rights for centuries. We can build coalitions while remembering who refused to build with us. We can work toward justice while demanding that white America reckon with its racism. Because here's the truth. Until white America truly confronts why it was comfortable with police brutality against Black people, until it examines the racism that made our suffering acceptable, until it acknowledges that it actively supported and defended a violent system, this awakening is temporary. Once ICE targets shift, once white folks feel safe again, they'll return to their comfortable position of supporting state violence against those they consider other. The cycle will continue. Real change requires more than temporary outrage. It requires examining the racist foundations that made police brutality possible in the first place. It requires acknowledging that Black Americans were right all along. It requires apologies, reparations, systemic transformation. It requires white America to stop using racism as a guide and start using justice, empathy, and truth. Black America has been sounding the alarm for generations. We've been the conscience of this nation, forcing it to confront its own brutality, even as we suffered that brutality. We've been offering solutions, strategies, and solidarity, even when none was offered in return. The question is whether white America will finally listen, truly listen, and join the fight for real justice, or whether this is just another moment of performative concern that will fade once the threat feels distant again. Many in white America celebrated police brutality until ICE started putting hands on them. That tells you everything you need to know about whose humanity they recognize and whose they don't. Let that be the lesson. Let that inform how we move forward. And let us never forget who stood with us when it cost something and who only cared when they were the ones being brutalized.